Hi, you're watching Reddit Shikstore, and if you're looking for a story that doesn't start with butterflies in your stomach and a happy ending, you've come to the right place. My name is Greyson. For 25 years, I was a crisis manager. Not for celebrities or politicians, but for corporations facing extinction. A toxic spill, a cancerous class action lawsuit, a CEO's disastrous tweet, these were my raw materials. I didn't fix problems. I performed narrative transplants. I taught empires how to walk again after their legs had been severed by truth. My tools were secrecy, leverage, and the absolute understanding that every institution, every person, has a pressure point. My success was measured in silence. The stories you never heard were my masterpieces. My wife, Isobel, was the director of sustainability for a colossal, publicly traded aerospace and energy conglomerate, Omnicorp International. Her job was to be their conscience and their shield. She crafted their reports on carbon capture, their pledges for oceanic preservation, their gospel of ethical innovation. She was brilliant at it. She made devastation sound like progress. I admired the elegant fiction of her work. In a way, we were in the same business. Selling a palatable version of reality. The affair began, as these things do, with a shared sense of mission. His name was Julian Ashford. He was Omnicorp new visionary in residence, a title as vague and pretentious as the man himself. A philosopher of technology, a futurist with a photogenic jawline and a TED Talk on the moral algorithm. He was hired to put a soul into their war machines and oil rigs. He and Isobel were tasked with co-authoring the company's ethical imperative for the 22nd century. A document meant to be forgotten, a tombstone for a future they'd never see. I saw the change in the data before I felt it in my heart. Our shared calendar, which once synced with the quiet rhythm of two demanding careers, began to show anomalies. Working dinners that lasted 4 hours at obscure farm-to-table restaurants 30 miles from their offices. Site visits to wind farms in remote locations where cell service, she claimed, was non-existent for days. A new, fervent jargon entered her vocabulary at home. Symbiotic ethics, post-human stewardship. It was Julian's lexicon. She was being rewritten. A crisis manager does not panic at the first sign of smoke. He identifies the fire, its fuel, and the prevailing wind. I began a passive audit. I cultivated a source, a deeply cynical, underpaid junior executive in Isobel's department who dreamed of a better job. In exchange for a glowing, anonymous recommendation to a rival firm, a simple favor from my vast, untraceable network of debts, she provided me with mundane but telling details. Julian's preferred boutique hotel chain, his allergy to shellfish, absent from Isobel's client dinner orders, the way they'd linger in the holographic simulation room after presentations, the lights dimmed, modeling climate scenarios. The confirmation was both poetic and banal. Isobel forgot to switch accounts on our shared home tablet. A draft email to Julian was still open. It wasn't a love letter. It was worse. It was a shared fantasy of legacy. When we present the imperative to the board, it won't just be a document, Jay. It will be our testament. The first page of a new world. Sometimes, when I look at you in those meetings, I don't see a colleague. I see the co-architect of everything that comes next. She had signed it, yours in the possible, I. The pain was not a feeling. It was a structural failure. The load-bearing wall of my life had been hollowed out. But a crisis manager's primary instinct is not to mourn the collapse. It is to control it. To ensure the rubble falls in a specific, advantageous pattern. Their affair wasn't just a passion, it was a partnership built on a shared fiction of purity within a corrupt empire. To destroy it, I wouldn't attack the affair. I would corrupt the fiction. I would make their paradise toxic. Julian Ashford's value was his untouchable, academic credibility. He was the monk blessing the worship. I needed to prove the monk was a mercenary. My research went back years, to his doctoral thesis at a minor European university. It was a turgid thing, but buried in its footnotes was a telling acknowledgement. His research had been privately funded by a grant from the Pandora Foundation. A name that meant nothing. But Pandora was, in fact, a dormant shell company I traced back, after weeks of digital archaeology, to a now-defunct mining consortium with a history of horrific ecological violations in the Amazon. Julian's early, pure academic work had been bought and paid for by the very devil he now claimed to exorcise. It was the original sin head buried. I didn't expose it. I weaponized it with precision. I anonymously fed this connection, framed as an interesting historical footnote, to a notoriously ruthless and pedantic investigative blogger who specialized in ethics washing. The blogger, a bloodhound, dug deeper. He found a pattern. Julian's career had always been shepherded by shadowy consultancies linked to controversial industries. The narrative wrote itself. Julian Ashford. The futurist whose moral compass was always for hire. The article stopped short of accusing Omnicorp of wrongdoing. It simply asked. If the visionary is a construct, what does that say about the vision? The first crack appeared in his pristine facade. Isobel's power was her perceived integrity. Her name gave Omnicorp greenwashing a veneer of believability. I needed to taint the source. Using my source inside her department, I obtained early, raw data from a flagship clean energy project she and Julian were championing, a next-generation solar array. The public data was optimistic. The raw engineering reports told a different story. Evidence of corner-cutting on toxic cadmium telluride panel disposal, projections of groundwater contamination that had been modeled out of the final presentation. This was my masterpiece of misdirection. I did not leak the documents to the press. That would be a war. I leaked a single, cryptic, internal memo, which I expertly forged, to Omnicorp's fiercest internal rival. The old guard, fossil fuel division whose budgets were being slashed to fund Isobel and Julian's visionary projects. The memo, seemingly from a mid-level sustainability engineer, expressed grave ethical concerns about data integrity in the Project Dawn reports and hinted at a cover-up to protect high-level sponsors. I gave the wolves inside the henhouse the scent of blood. The internal civil war was instant and vicious. Accusations of data fraud and ideological sabotage flew in secure boardroom channels. An emergency audit was demanded. Isobel was suddenly not their shining knight, but a liability, a politicized figure in a brutal corporate civil war. The shared testament she and Julian were writing was now evidence in an internal investigation. With Julian's credibility bleeding and Isobel's department under siege, they grew desperate. They needed a public win, a grand gesture to silence the doubters. Julian, in a closed-door strategy session, the details of which cost me a $20,000 bribe to a compromised security consultant, proposed an audacious gamble. A voluntary, preemptive shutdown of an aging, but still profitable, Omnicorp coal plant in a swing state. It would be a unilateral act of moral courage, a story destined for the front page. This was their checkmate move. And I was ready for it. Through a network of libertarian think tanks and union lobbyists I cultivated over years, useful idiots in 100 potential crises, I orchestrated a grassroots firestorm. Op-eds painted the shutdown not as moral, but as elitist, a job-killing stunt by coastal elites to virtue signal. The union, fed incendiary talking points about betrayal, threatened strike action across all Omnicorp facilities. A senator from the state, whose campaign I had anonymously supported long ago, decried economic terrorism dressed up as environmentalism. The board of Omnicorp, already reeling from internal strife and now facing a political and labor tsunami, panicked. The shutdown plan was scrapped 24 hours before the triumphant press conference. The leak of this humiliation was spectacular. Julian and Isobel were not just defeated, they were revealed as politically naive fools who had nearly ignited a cataclysm for the company. Their judgment was now synonymous with catastrophic risk. In the wake of the disaster, the board needed a story to survive. My life's work had prepared me for this exact moment. I provided them with one. Through an encrypted, anonymized channel, I sent the board a comprehensive, professional crisis assessment. It outlined, in cold, corporate language, the root cause of the fiasco. Not a well-intentioned mistake, but a failed managerial symbiosis. It diagnosed a toxic partnership between Ashford, the unmoored visionary, and Isobel, the co-opted executive, that had pathologically bypassed all corporate governance and reality testing protocols. It recommended, for the health of the corporation, a complete and immediate surgical separation from both sources of infection. They took my advice. Julian Ashford was dismissed for gross misjudgment and overreach. Isobel was offered a choice. A protracted, public investigation into the data integrity issues, or a quiet, immediate resignation with a modest severance and a binding non-disclosure agreement. She resigned. Her career, built on being the ethical voice in the room, ended with her being silently escorted from the building, her past deactivated, her legacy erased to protect the corporation. The aftermath. The silence. She sits now in the sunlit conservatory of our home, a space I designed to be a sanctuary. She is a monument to stillness. The woman who debated the fate of the planet in boardrooms now stares for hours at the slow progress of a shadow across the floor. She believed she was devoured by corporate cynicism, betrayed by Julian's hubris, and sacrificed to the gods of quarterly profits. She looks to me, her husband who understands crisis, her anchor in the shameful quiet. They used our dream to destroy us, she said last night, her voice hollow. The truth didn't matter. Only the story. I took her hand, my grip steady, a rock in her quicksand. There is only ever the story, Isobel, I said, my voice the epitome of weary wisdom. The trick is to be the one who writes it. And I did. I authored every chapter of their ruin. I didn't fight their affair. I orchestrated the collapse of the world that made it possible. I was the ghost in their machine, the flaw in their algorithm, the anonymous author of their obituaries. Now, I manage my final and most quiet account. I tend to the living silence that was once my wife. I listen to the profound peace of a crisis perfectly, permanently resolved. It is my ultimate masterpiece. No headlines. No scandal. Just the smooth, unblemished surface of a story that has reached its optimal, silent conclusion. In the end, the master crisis manager's revenge is the most complete. He doesn't create the disaster. He simply guides it to the door of his choosing, and then he offers himself as the only architect of the peace that follows.